Hi friends, I have a treat for you today. Instead of blogging, I thought I would vlog. So we're doing a video for a few days. This morning, during my quiet time, I read a passage that just really jumped off the page at me and I wanted to share it with you. And instead of typing it out, I just thought I would speak it to you so you could hear it's coming straight from my voice. You realize, of course, that back in the spring, I finished writing Joseph, Keeping a Soft Heart in a Hard Place. And maybe you've even done the Bible study, you've already purchased it or you're working through it. But I found out today that I left something huge out because I learned another lesson about Joseph that I had not seen before. And so I just had to get it out, so I'm going to bring it to you today on this vlog. I'd like for you to go ahead, if you have your Bible with you, and I hope you'll grab it if you could. In Genesis 33 is where our lesson is. It's Genesis 33 verses 1 through 11. And so let me go ahead and give you the background. But first of all, what I want you to know is that this is a situation where Joseph is present. And we know that because God takes the time and makes a point of showing us that Joseph is there. Twice he mentions Joseph's presence. But this is not really a story about Joseph. This is about his dad Jacob and his uncle Esau. Now you'll remember that Jacob and Esau are twin brothers. But Esau technically was born before Jacob. But Jacob, the heel grabber, the conniver, would do anything it took to get what he did not have and what he wanted. And so you might remember from earlier passages in Genesis that Jacob had weaseled Esau out of his birthright, and he had downright stolen his blessing from his dad from him, that blessing that's reserved for the firstborn that belonged to Esau, but Jacob stole it from him. Well, of course, Esau was just fit to be tied, especially about that latter crime. And so he promised and pledged to kill Jacob. Well, Rebekah, Jacob's mother, said, "Get out of Dodge." And so she sent him to Laban, her brother, and told him to find a wife there. Well, to make this long story short, Jacob actually found two wives there. He married Rachel and her sister Leah, and his family began to grow. Even though Jacob was quite a weasel, God's favor was on him, and he was gracious to Jacob. Jacob's family grew. At the time that we see Jacob here in Genesis 33, he has 11 sons and one daughter. And his household grew. He had servants, and he had animals. He had cattle, and he had sheep, and he had goats, and he had been a very prosperous man. And so he had lived in Laban's territory for 20 years, and now it is time for him to go back to Canaan. God has sent him back to Canaan. And God is going with him. God has made it very clear to Jacob that he is with him and he is in this thing. But Jacob has to go back and face Esau, the one who he hurt so terribly. And I think maybe after living with Laban for 20 years, and Laban also was conniving, and Jacob gotten a taste of his own medicine, Jacob realized how desperately, how badly he had hurt Esau. So as he's approaching the place where he knows he'll run into Esau, he's preparing and he's afraid. He really is fearful, and we see that here in Jacob. Now remember, Jacob is Joseph's dad. And I think Joseph is just a young man or a boy at this time, but I think he must really take note of what he sees happen, because we see a similar situation play out in Joseph's life years later. So let's read Genesis 33, 1 through 11. And it says, "Then Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maids. And he put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and then Rachel and and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother." So let's just paint that picture. Jacob has sent ahead the maids and their children, several of the sons, and then Leah and several other sons, and Dinah, and then Rachel and just her one son, Joseph. But as he sees Esau approaching, Jacob goes on ahead of all of them, and he begins to bow down to Esau even before he approaches him. He bows down, he gets up, he walks a little closer, he bows down again, he gets up, he walks a little closer. He does this 7 times. He's bowing down before his brother in humility, and he is afraid. But let's see what happens in verse 4. "Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when he lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children, Esau said, 'Who are these with you?' And Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids came near with their children, and they bowed down. And Leah likewise came near with her children, and they bowed down. And afterward, Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And Jacob said, "It's to find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own." And Jacob said, "No, please, if now I have found favor in your sight, then take my present from my hand. For I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please take my gift, which has been brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have plenty." Thus he urged him, and Esau took it. Wow. You know what I see here is a beautiful, beautiful picture of forgiveness and mercy and compassion. And what's neat is Joseph saw the same thing. He had a front row seat to this beautiful display of forgiveness, not by his dad, but by his uncle Esau. Now, I don't know if Joseph knew what had been going on. I'm not sure if he knew the drama, but he certainly saw the drama of the day, right? So he must have known that his dad had done something terrible to his uncle Esau. For him to bow down 7 times as he approached. For him to bring all this cattle and sheep and goats to offer to him. To call him Lord and to call himself thy servant. Joseph had to have known that Jacob must have done something pretty despicable. And he probably didn't really deserve to even be allowed into Esau's presence, much less to live. And yet Joseph also saw Esau give such grace and forgiveness to his dad. How do you do that? Well, here's the first thing that I learned from this passage, is that forgiveness has to first be worked out with God before it can be walked out with another person. You know, we desperately want to forgive if we want to follow Christ and be obedient to him. I know that's your heart. Even if you're struggling with a true pain, a deep wound, I know you want to forgive, but it's hard, isn't it? It was hard for me. I think what I finally did under the instruction of Max Lucado, and he had mentioned this in a book, and the picture really stuck with me, but what I finally did was I pictured myself as walking the acreage of my heart with God, and I just had to get real with God, and I had to point out the roots of bitterness that I had allowed to take root in the soil of my heart. And I had to point out the boulders and the walls that I had built out of hatred and anger. And I had to point out to him that the soil of my heart had lost some of its fertility because I was in despair. I had drawn in and turned my focus away from God and onto my pitiful situation. And as I pointed those things out to God, I also had to give him permission to uproot the bitterness, and to push away the boulders of hate and anger. And I had to give him permission to sow the seeds of his love and his grace in my heart so that good things could grow there again. That's how I did the work of forgiveness. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of prayer. It took really focusing on, meditating on, and really truly even memorizing some scriptures like 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7, that tells me what love really is. It also took me focusing on the gift of grace that he had given me through Jesus Christ. I spent some time really meditating on the scriptures about Jesus' crucifixion so I could understand and try to at least comprehend a little better the gift of grace that he had given me. I worked out that forgiveness before I was able to walk out my forgiveness. So today, if you're in a place where you've been wounded and you've been hurt, and maybe you're really struggling to forgive, I want you to know I completely understand. It took a long time for my wounded heart to heal. But I can tell you this, my wounded heart has been healed. I am once again living with joy and purpose, and I'm able to connect and thrive in my life again, and I am so thrilled. And I didn't do it. God did it. but I did have to work through forgiveness with him before I could walk in forgiveness with another. So friend, I encourage you to spend some time in Genesis 33, 1 through 11. Pray through it with God. Talk to him about it. Ask him if maybe you need to go on a walk through the soil, through the landscape of your heart, and point out some things to him that need to be removed. Meanwhile, I hope you'll join me back here again in a few days, and we'll look at this passage once again. And I'm going to show you a few other jewels that I found here, and I cannot wait to share them with you. So I hope you'll come back. I'll see you later.